What happens to Sarah in Outer Banks Season 5? Her fate explained. Warning: major spoilers for Outer Banks Season 5. Sarah Cameron survives the final season, stays with John B., and ultimately gets the happy ending fans were hoping for. She and John B. rebuild the chateau, have a son named JJ, and get married 1 year later. Her pregnancy from Season 4 becomes part of the show's final time jump and future-focused ending. So, what actually happens to Sarah Cameron in Outer Banks Season 5? After everything, Sarah has survived over 5 seasons. The final season gives her one of the most hopeful endings in the entire series. But getting there isn't easy. Season 5 begins with Sarah dealing with the loss of JJ, while she and John B. are also facing the reality that they're going to become parents. The Pogues are stranded far from home. Chandler Groff is still out there. The Blue Crown is still missing. And the group is being hunted from multiple directions. For Sarah, however, the final season is ultimately about something bigger than treasure. It's about family, survival, and finally building a life with John B. Sarah starts Season 5 pregnant. At the end of Season 4, Sarah discovers that she's pregnant with John B.'s baby. That revelation completely changes the direction of her character. For most of Outer Banks, Sarah has been trying to escape something. First, she's trying to escape her wealthy kook family. Then she's trying to escape Ward's control. She's trying to escape Rafe. She's constantly running from danger. But now she has something new to think about: her own family. Season 5 continues that storyline. However, the pregnancy isn't turned into a traditional pregnancy drama. Madeline Klein had previously explained that Sarah wouldn't be wearing a huge artificial baby bump throughout the season, partly because of the timeline and the practical realities of filming. Instead, the pregnancy works mainly as a symbol of the future Sarah and John B. are trying to create. And that becomes especially important after JJ's death. JJ's death changes Sarah too. The final season begins after one of the most devastating events in the entire series. JJ Maybank is dead. Chandler Groff, JJ's biological father, murdered him after their confrontation over the Blue Crown. For Sarah, JJ's death is devastating because he wasn't simply John B.'s best friend. He was part of their family. The Pogues had spent years together. They had survived impossible situations together. And suddenly one of them was gone. Sarah has to watch her friends grieve while also dealing with her own pregnancy. That creates a powerful contrast. JJ's life has ended. Sarah is carrying a new life. And the final season repeatedly balances those two ideas: death and new beginnings. Sarah doesn't die. One of the biggest questions fans had before Season 5 was whether Sarah would survive. After JJ's death, it seemed like nobody was safe. The show had already demonstrated that it was willing to kill major characters. But Sarah makes it through the final season alive. She survives the Pogues' final treasure hunt, the conflict with Groff, the search for the Blue Crown, and the dangerous events surrounding the royal merchant treasure. Her survival is important because Sarah has spent the entire series being put in increasingly dangerous situations. By the end, she finally gets something she rarely had before: peace. What happens between Sarah and John B? Sarah and John B remain together, and their relationship becomes more mature. When the series began, they were teenagers who fell in love while running from danger. Their relationship was passionate, but it was also surrounded by chaos. They were constantly being separated. They were constantly hiding. And they were constantly trying to survive. Season 5 changes that. John B. and Sarah are now thinking about their child. They're thinking about their home. They're thinking about what life looks like after the treasure hunts. That is a major transformation. The couple doesn't simply survive the final adventure. They actually begin building the future they've been trying to reach. Does Sarah have the baby? Yes. And this is where the ending differs from what viewers may expect. Sarah doesn't give birth during the main treasure hunting portion of Season 5. Instead, the finale jumps forward. And we eventually learn that Sarah and John B have a son. Even more importantly, they name him JJ, after their fallen friend. That is one of the most emotional details in the entire finale. The name isn't random. JJ was one of the most important people in their lives. He was John B.'s best friend. He was Kiara's love. And he was part of the family the Pogues created together. Naming their son JJ allows Sarah and John B. to keep his memory alive. It's also a reminder that JJ's story doesn't simply disappear because he died. His friends carry him forward. Why name the baby JJ? This may be the most meaningful part of Sarah's ending. The Pogues spend much of Season 5 trying to avenge JJ. Kiera wants revenge. John B. wants justice. Everyone is grieving. But eventually they have to learn how to live without him. Sarah and John B. naming their son JJ becomes a form of remembrance. They're not replacing JJ. They're honoring him. The baby represents a future that JJ never got to have. And that makes Sarah's pregnancy much more meaningful in retrospect. At the beginning, it seemed like another obstacle for the Pogues. By the end, it becomes a symbol of hope. Sarah and John B. rebuild the chateau. After everything they've been through, Sarah and John B. also rebuild the chateau. This is important because the chateau has always been closely connected to John B.'s life. It's his home. It's where the Pogues spent time together. And it's part of the history that connects John B. to his father. Rebuilding it means John B. isn't simply running away from his past anymore. He's taking what was broken and rebuilding it. Sarah becomes part of that new life. Together, they create a home for their family. And that gives Sarah a completely different ending from the girl we met in Season 1. She started the series as a wealthy kook desperate to escape her family. She ends it creating a family of her own. Does Sarah and John B. get married? Yes. The finale ultimately gives Sarah and John B. the wedding that many fans expected. After the time jump, they are married at the rebuilt chateau. And this is a significant choice by the writers. Their relationship has survived almost everything. They've been separated,
Kidnapped.
hunted, shipwrecked,
Betrayed.
they've lost friends, and they've repeatedly been forced to choose each other. So, the wedding isn't simply a romantic moment. It's the final confirmation that they made it. After 5 seasons of chaos, John B. and Sarah finally get a normal future. Or, at least as normal as life in the Outer Banks universe can be. What happens to Sarah's family? Sarah's relationship with her family has always been complicated. Ward is dead. Rafe has gone through his own redemption. And the Cameron family isn't the powerful dynasty it once was. Sarah has therefore effectively escaped the world she grew up in. But she doesn't escape by simply running away. She builds something different. That's important. Sarah spent years believing that being a Cameron defined her. By the end, it doesn't. She's John B.'s wife. She's JJ's mother. She's part of the Pogue family. And she's built a life that isn't controlled by her father's money or her family's expectations. What happens to Sarah and Rafe? Sarah and Rafe don't suddenly become a perfect brother and sister team. Their history is too complicated. Rafe caused enormous damage. He tried to kill Sarah in earlier seasons. He blamed her for his problems. But Season 5 allows them to move toward something resembling peace. Rafe eventually becomes an unlikely ally of the Pogues. He helps them in their fight against Groff. And Sarah sees a different side of her brother. Rafe also eventually leaves Kildare and begins building his own future. So Sarah and Rafe don't erase the past. But they don't have to remain enemies forever. That's another part of Sarah's emotional growth. She no longer has to live in constant fear of her family. What does Sarah's ending represent? Sarah's ending is really about breaking the cycle. Look at where she started. She was born into wealth. She had a powerful but dysfunctional family. She was expected to behave like a kook. She was surrounded by privilege. But she never felt at home there. Then she met John B. And she chose the Pogues. That choice cost her a lot. She lost her relationship with her father. She became estranged from Rafe. She lost her wealth and security. But eventually, she gained something more valuable. A family she chose. And that's why the ending works. Sarah doesn't return to the Cameron lifestyle. She doesn't become the wealthy princess of Figure 8 again. She chooses John B. She chooses their child. She chooses the Pogues. And she chooses a life built around the people she actually loves. Does Sarah get a happy ending? Yes. Compared with some of the other characters, Sarah gets one of the happiest endings in the finale. She survives. She stays with John B. She gives birth to their son. They name him JJ. They rebuild the chateau. And 1 year later, they get married. That's an enormous transformation from the Sarah we met in season 1. She went from being a teenager trapped inside a wealthy family to becoming a mother and wife who has created a family on her own terms. The meaning of Sarah's final scene. The final image of Sarah and John B is important because it's not about treasure. For 5 seasons, the show has trained viewers to expect another map, another secret, another artifact, another villain. But Sarah's ending is deliberately different. There's no treasure hunt. There's no villain chasing them. There's no family crisis. There's just a future. And that is exactly what Sarah has been searching for since season 1. Freedom. Not freedom to run away. Freedom to stay. Freedom to build something. Freedom to choose her family. And that's what she finally gets. Final Fate explained. So, what happens to Sarah in Outer Banks season 5? Sarah survives the final season. She continues her relationship with John B. while dealing with her pregnancy and the devastating loss of JJ. The Pogues eventually complete their final adventure, and Sarah and John B. move beyond the treasure-hunting life. They rebuild the chateau. Sarah gives birth to their son. They name him JJ in honor of their friend. And then, after a time jump, Sarah and John B. get married. It's a remarkably hopeful ending for a character who has spent most of the series running from danger. Sarah doesn't die. She doesn't lose her baby. She doesn't break up with John B. Instead, she finally gets the future she never believed she could have. And there's something especially fitting about the fact that the girl who spent the entire series trying to escape her family eventually creates one of her own. Sarah Cameron begins Outer Banks as a cook who doesn't belong. She ends it as a wife, a mother, and one of the people who helped keep the Pogues together. And her son carrying JJ's name makes the ending even more emotional. JJ may be gone, but his memory becomes part of the future. And for Sarah, that future is finally peaceful. After 5 seasons of running, Sarah Cameron finally gets to stay.